She dropped her survival gear just to run faster. There's a feeling, isn't there? That cold prickle down your neck when you're alone in the woods. A sound that's not quite wind. A shape that shouldn't be there. Most people write it off as nerves, imagination, the silence playing tricks. But some don't make it out to explain. In this episode, we dive into 3 chilling stories of people who weren't just lost in the wild, they were hunted. A solo hiker forced to abandon everything just to escape something watching her from the trees. 3 children who vanished into the mountains and returned with a story of monsters with dark eyes and sharp teeth. And a former football star, fearless and unshakable, until one final call, breathless with terror, said, "They're following me." These aren't campfire tales. These are real accounts of primal fear, relentless pursuit, and the terrifying truth that something, or someone, might be out there. Our first account takes us deep into the sprawling wilderness of the Serpent River National Forest, following the journey of Clara Vance, a young woman whose quest for solitude turned into a harrowing encounter with the unknown. Clara wasn't some wide-eyed novice plunging unprepared into the backcountry. At 22, fresh out of college with a degree that felt more like a question mark than an answer, she knew these woods. Or thought she did. Growing up nearby, she'd learned their rhythms, their challenges, their deceptive beauty. This trip, a meticulously planned 43-mile trek along the demanding Whispering Peaks Trail, wasn't just about finding herself in the cliché sense. It was about shedding a skin. Escaping the wreckage of a relationship that had imploded spectacularly, silencing the well-meaning but suffocating chorus of parental expectations, proving something. Mostly to herself. That she was capable, resilient, not defined by the recent chaos. 7 days completely solo, navigating by map and compass, relying solely on her skills and the supplies in her pack. Then, a planned rendezvous with her friend Maya at Shepherd's Gap for resupply and companionship for the final leg. Simple. Achievable. A necessary reset. The first 2 days unfolded exactly as hoped. Crisp autumn air, the scent of pine and damp earth, the satisfying crunch of leaves under her boots. Sunlight streamed through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. The solitude was a balm, the physical exertion a welcome distraction. She hiked hard, made camp efficiently, felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease with each mile logged. She was competent. She was strong. She was exactly where she needed to be. Day 3 dawned differently. Not in the weather, the sky remained stubbornly clear, but within Clara herself. She woke in her small tent, cocooned in her sleeping bag, to an immediate, inexplicable sense of dread. It wasn't the slow creep of loneliness or the worry about a forgotten task. This was a thick, cold certainty that something was fundamentally wrong. A weight pressing down, an icy fist clenching in her stomach. She did a mental inventory. Stove fuel? Check. Water filter? Check. Bear spray accessible? Check. Nothing amiss. Yet the feeling persisted, a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of her thoughts. Maybe just trail fatigue? Or dehydration catching up? She pushed it aside, forcing herself through the familiar morning routine. Boil water, choke down oatmeal, break camp. Get moving. Movement would clear her head. She was stuffing her sleeping bag into its compression sack, back turned to the dense tree-line bordering her small clearing, when a flicker of movement caught her eye. Not the darting flash of a squirrel or the slow amble of a deer. Something else. She looked up, scanning the wall of pines and shadowed undergrowth. Nothing. Just trees. Stillness. But then, there, partially obscured by the thick trunk of an old-growth fir, perhaps 40 feet away. A shape. Tall. Impossibly still. Man-shaped, yes, but the proportions felt off. Or maybe it was the way it blended too perfectly with the shadows, less a solid form and more a tear in the fabric of the forest. She froze, heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. A hiker? Off trail? Possible, but unlikely this deep in. And why hide? Why the unnerving stillness? She squinted, trying to resolve the shape into something familiar, something explainable. And just like that, it was gone. Vanished. As if it had simply dissolved back into the dappled light and shadow. Clara stood there for a long minute, compression sack clutched in her hand, breath held tight. Her mind raced. Did I really see that? Am I losing it? Just tired? She scanned the treeline again, desperately willing the figure to reappear, to wave, to call out a greeting, anything to normalize the moment. Nothing. The woods remained silent, watchful. But the feeling of being observed hadn't vanished with the figure. It intensified. A palpable pressure, like countless unseen eyes fixed upon her. It wasn't the neutral curiosity of woodland creatures. This felt appraising. Predatory. Suddenly, her competence, her experience, felt laughably inadequate. She was alone, vulnerable, and whatever she had seen, or thought she'd seen, didn't want to be identified. It preferred to watch from the shadows. That was not normal. Rationalization crumbled. The dread she'd woken with now blazed into full-blown panic. Her sixth sense, honed by years spent in wild places, wasn't just whispering danger, it was screaming. Run. Her hands fumbled with the tent poles, clumsy with adrenaline. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, sounded like a signal, a closing net. She glanced constantly over her shoulder, expecting to see the tall, shadowy figure stepping out from behind a tree. Nothing. But the feeling, oh God, the feeling was unbearable. Pack finally assembled, she didn't hesitate. She didn't yell out. Instinct screamed that drawing attention was the last thing she should do. She swung the pack onto her back and bolted, not back towards the trail she'd come from, but away from where she'd seen the figure, deeper into the woods. There was supposed to be an old, disused logging road running parallel to the trail, further down the mountain slope. She knew it was a gamble, leaving the marked path was rule number one: you didn't break. But staying on the trail felt like walking into a trap. The logging road, if she could find it, offered a potential shortcut to civilization, miles away though it might be. It felt like the lesser of two evils. Crashing through tangled undergrowth, branches whipping at her face, lungs burning, she focused only on moving downhill, away from the campsite, away from the watching eyes. It wasn't long before the sound started. A heavy thump-thump somewhere behind her and off to the side. Too rhythmic for a deer, too heavy for, well, for anything she could readily identify. She'd whirl around, eyes wide, searching the dense woods. Nothing. Silence would fall, only for the footsteps to resume moments later, always seemingly keeping pace, maintaining a distance. Then came the other sound. A low, guttural noise. Not quite a growl, not quite a yell, but something deeply unsettling, resonating with a raw, primitive quality that sent ice shooting through her veins. It wasn't animal. It wasn't quite human. It was other. Days bled into a disorienting nightmare. She ran when she could, walked numbly when exhaustion claimed her, always pushing forward, hoping the next ridge would reveal the logging road. It never did. The terrain grew rougher, steeper. The pursuing sounds were her constant companions, the heavy footsteps, the guttural calls, sometimes seeming closer, sometimes farther, a cruel game of cat and mouse. Was she being herded? Toyed with? The psychological terror became as debilitating as the physical strain. Sleep offered no refuge. Curled in her tent, she'd listen to the heavy tread circling her campsite, just beyond the fragile nylon walls. The low, rumbling sounds seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Was she losing her mind? The exhaustion, the fear, the isolation, could it all be some elaborate paranoid delusion? A total mental breakdown triggered by the stress? The thought was almost as terrifying as the alternative. But the sounds felt too real, too persistent. On the fifth day, or maybe the sixth, time had lost all meaning, the pursuit felt closer than ever. The guttural noises were sharp, urgent, seemingly right behind her. Panic, absolute and overwhelming, seized her. She scrambled down a steep, scree-covered slope, her pack catching on a low branch, throwing her off balance. In that instant, a terrifying clarity hit her. The pack was slowing her down. It was life support, yes, food, shelter, water filter, but it was also weight. Deadly weight. In a decision born of pure, animalistic fear, she ripped the pack from her shoulders, letting it tumble away down the slope. Her sleeping bag, her tent, her remaining food, gone. All that mattered was speed. Lightness. Escape. The level of terror required to make such a choice, it was astronomical. Only someone convinced they were moments from death would abandon their only means of survival. She ran. Lighter, faster, but now utterly exposed. No shelter, no supplies beyond the clothes on her back and a knife on her belt. Hours later, delirious with thirst and hunger, staggering through an unfamiliar grove of ancient cedars, she saw it. Leaning against the moss-covered trunk of the largest cedar, almost presented, were things. Perfectly arranged wild berries, glistening nuts piled neatly, and nestled beside them, a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its tiny form impossibly detailed. It was surreal. Bizarre. Beautiful and deeply, deeply wrong. A trap? A mocking gift? Or something else entirely? She hesitated, every instinct screaming caution. But the gnawing hunger, the burning thirst, they won. She devoured the berries, scooped handfuls of nuts, drank deeply from a nearby stream she hadn't noticed before. The strange cache kept her alive, but its presence only amplified the terrifying inexplicability of her ordeal. 2 more days passed in a dehydrated, starved haze. Then, salvation, or so it seemed. A figure emerged through the trees, an old man, weathered face, carrying a hunting rifle. Silas, he introduced himself later. But Clara's first reaction was a relief. It was blind terror. She scrambled backwards, trying to hide, convinced he was the source of her torment, the hunter finally revealing himself. It took Silas long minutes of calm talking, keeping his distance, to convince her he meant no harm. When she finally allowed him to approach, he was shocked by her condition. Skeletal, clothes torn, eyes wide with a haunted, animalistic fear, babbling incoherently about being chased, about sounds, about the woods watching her. Back in civilization, recovering in a hospital bed, Clara tried to piece together her fragmented memories for the disbelieving authorities. A young woman, alone, experienced but perhaps overwhelmed, gets lost, suffers exposure, hallucinates. It was the neatest explanation. The most comfortable one. But it didn't account for the sheer duration, the specific sounds she described, the impossible food cache, the visceral certainty of pursuit that had driven her to abandon her gear. Local rangers, when pressed, might reluctantly mention the old stories, whispers of the Watchers, feral mountain dwellers rumored to inhabit the deepest parts of Serpent River for generations, fiercely territorial, sometimes hostile. Legends dismissed by official reports, but persistent nonetheless. Clara herself could offer no definitive answers. The psychological scars remained, nightmares plagued her sleep, the silence of quiet places felt threatening, the ambiguity of her experience a wound that wouldn't close. Was it paranoia born of isolation and fear? A complete mental breakdown? Or did something truly unknown, something ancient and possessive of its domain, hunt Clara Vance through the whispering peaks? The woods kept their silence, guarding the secret of her terror. Clara Vance survived, carrying the weight of an experience that defies easy explanation. But what happens when the ones pursued are merely children, and their tale of escape borders on the impossible? The chilling events at Shadow Mountain offer another disturbing glimpse into the unknown. Lost on Shadow Mountain, the children and the chasing shadows. While Clara Vance faced her ordeal alone as an adult, the wilderness can feel even more menacing when the potential victims are children, their vulnerability amplifying the terror of the unknown. In the sun-drenched summer of 1951, high in the mountains near the picturesque Eagle's Nest ski resort, nestled at the base of the imposing Shadow Mountain, a perfect family picnic descended into a nightmare that defied logic and left lingering questions as chilling as the thin mountain air. It was June 7th, a day tailor-made for escaping the city heat. 2 families, the Millers and the Abbotts, close friends and relatives, had spread blankets on a grassy meadow overlooking the ski runs, silent and green now that the winter snows had retreated. Laughter echoed as the children played. 7-year-old Leo Miller, the cautious older brother, his bright, 5-year-old sister Mia, and their little cousin, 3-year-old Finn Abbott, toddling determinedly to keep up. They chased butterflies near the edge of the meadow, where the manicure grass gave way abruptly to the dense, tangled forest that climbed the steep slopes of Shadow Mountain. The parents, relaxed and chatting, unpacked sandwiches and lemonade, soaking in the panoramic views and the comforting normalcy of a shared family outing. Just an ordinary, happy day. And then, in the space of a heartbeat, it wasn't. One moment, the children's shouts and laughter were the soundtrack to the afternoon. The next, an unnerving silence fell. Annoyed at first, thinking the kids were playing hide-and-seek, one of the mothers called out, "Leo? Mia? Finn? Lunchtime." Only the breeze whispered back through the pines. Concern flickered. A quick scan of the meadow revealed nothing. They couldn't have gone far. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise. The parents fanned out, calling frantically, their voices growing tighter with each unanswered shout. They checked behind the few large boulders dotting the meadow, peered into the sparse aspen groves nearby. Nothing. The horrifying realization dawned, the only other place they could have gone was up. Straight into the dense, dark woods that loomed over them, a wilderness known for its treacherous footing and sudden drop-offs. Impossible for such young children to navigate. Impossible. Raw panic propelled one of the fathers towards the main ski lodge, usually bustling in winter but now sleepy, staffed only by a lone summer caretaker. He burst in, gasping out the story. The caretaker, stunned, unlocked the office phone. The call to the authorities was thick with fear. Soon, the first police car arrived, sirens momentarily silencing the birdsong. Officers surveyed the scene, their faces grim as they took in the intimidating terrain. How could 3 small children, one barely more than a toddler, have possibly ventured into that? And how far could they have gotten? The possibility of abduction, sickening and terrifying, hung heavy in the air. As dusk began to settle, casting long, ominous shadows down the mountainside, massive spotlights were brought in, their powerful beams cutting through the twilight, aimed hopefully up the slopes. A desperate beacon, praying the children, if merely lost, might see the light and find their way back. All through the night, parents and hastily assembled volunteers combed the lower reaches of Shadow Mountain, their flashlights carving small circles in the oppressive darkness, voices hoarse from shouting names into the vast, unresponding wilderness. Some claimed a sudden, violent thunderstorm rolled through after midnight, lashing the mountainside with rain and wind, halting the search and amplifying the parents' already unbearable agony. Children lost, exposed, on that rugged mountain, in a storm. It was unthinkable. The next morning dawned gray and uncertain. The search escalated into a major operation. Hundreds of volunteers now joined police and rangers, fanning out in grid patterns, though the steep, broken ground made any organized effort incredibly difficult. Search dogs were brought in, but they struggled to pick up any consistent scent on the rocky, windswept terrain. The hours dragged on. The parents, hollow-eyed and wrapped in blankets at the makeshift command post, oscillated between fragile hope and crushing despair. The abduction theory felt increasingly likely, paradoxically almost preferable to the image of their babies alone and terrified on the mountain. Searchers returned empty-handed, their faces etched with fatigue and frustration. By late afternoon on the second day, a grim resignation had begun to set in. That's when the call came crackling over the radio. A lone volunteer, a grizzled local rancher named Gus who knew the mountain like the back of his hand, had pushed far beyond the established search perimeter, driven by a hunch or perhaps just sheer stubbornness. He was miles away from the picnic site, thousands of feet higher up Shadow Mountain, in terrain Search Command had deemed virtually inaccessible for the children. Exhausted, sweating under the afternoon sun, he was about to give up, to finally turn back, when something caught his eye. A flash of bright red fabric, stark against the muted greens and browns, near the base of a massive, fallen ponderosa pine. He scrambled closer, heart pounding. Peeking out from the shadowed hollow of the enormous log was a small face. Then another. And another. Gus let out a whoop of sheer disbelief and relief. He stumbled forward. Huddled deep inside the log were Leo, Mia, and Finn. They were covered in scratches, faces smudged with dirt, clothes torn, visibly dehydrated and trembling, their eyes huge and dark with fear. But they were alive. All three. Gus fumbled for his radio, his voice choked with emotion as he relayed the news. Found. They were found. But even as relief washed over him, the question hammered in his mind, how in the name of God did they get all the way up here? The reunion back at the base camp was a blur of tears, hugs, and overwhelming relief. Doctors quickly examined the children. Miraculously, apart from the scratches, dehydration, and obvious exhaustion and terror, they were physically unharmed. Once the initial chaos subsided, the police gently began to ask the question on everyone's mind. What happened? How did you get way up there? Leo, clutching his mother's hand, was the spokesperson, though his voice was small, hesitant. He looked around nervously, as if expecting something to emerge from the surrounding trees even now. They were playing, he whispered, just near the edge of the woods. Making a fort. Then, it came out. A big, dark, growling thing, he said, shuddering. It burst from behind a tree. Huge. Loud. Its eyes were scary. They didn't wait to see more. They just ran. Ran as fast as their little legs could carry them, straight uphill, away from the meadow, scrambling over rocks and roots, tears streaming down their faces. Leo remembered grabbing Mia's hand, yelling for Finn to keep up. They ran until they couldn't run anymore, until their lungs felt like they would burst. That's when they saw the big, hollow log. A perfect hiding place. They scrambled inside, huddling together in the darkness, listening as the growling thing crashed around outside, sniffing, making angry noises. It stayed near for a long time, Leo insisted, before finally moving off. But then, Leo added something else, something even stranger, his voice dropping lower. There was another one. Not the growling thing. Something different. A tall, hairy man, he said, his eyes wide. Like the grumpy one in Finn's monster book. He wasn't growling, just walking around near the log later, after the first thing had gone. Looking for them? Leo didn't know. He just knew they stayed hidden, terrified, until the man with the kind eyes, Gus, found them. The adults listened, exchanging baffled, uneasy glances. A bear? Possible, though as mentioned, sightings were common right near the resort base. And if it was a bear actively chasing them, surely it would have caught 3 small children, especially running uphill. Bears are fast. And why would it simply give up after cornering them in the log? It didn't make sense. The distance, too, over 3 miles, thousands of feet up brutally rugged terrain. Adrenaline is powerful, yes. Terror can fuel impossible feats, especially in children running for their lives. Maybe it was possible they covered that ground. But the second figure? The hairy man? Who or what was that? A searcher? The timeline didn't fit. Official search teams weren't anywhere near that high on the mountain during the first day or night when the children claimed to see both figures. A hallucination brought on by extreme fear and exhaustion? Certainly plausible for traumatized children. Or was it connected to local folklore, the same whispers of watchers were wild men that surfaced in other strange disappearances in remote mountain regions? Could they have encountered 2 separate, terrifying entities? The relief of the children's miraculous survival understandably overshadowed the bizarre details of their story. The parents, consumed with gratitude, didn't push for explanations that their children clearly couldn't provide. The police, satisfied with a positive outcome, filed their report, children lost in the wilderness, located safe. Case closed. Yet, the nagging questions remain unanswered, hanging in the mountain air like mist. What truly chased Leo, Mia, and Finn up Shadow Mountain? How did they survive a journey that seemed physically impossible? And who, or what, was the tall, hairy figure Leo described? Their survival against the odds is a testament to childhood resilience, perhaps. Or maybe, something else entirely. It's another baffling piece in the puzzle of wilderness horror. The terror experienced by children lost in the woods is perhaps understandable, but the phenomenon of being hunted in the wild spares no one. Even the strong, the capable, can find themselves gripped by inexplicable fear, as tragically demonstrated in the case of Marcus "Rhino" Riley, a man whose final hours became a terrifying enigma. The Blackwater Creek Mystery, Marcus Riley's last call. The terror experienced by children lost in the woods is perhaps understandable, their small forms dwarfed by the immensity of nature and their minds susceptible to fear's wildest imaginings. But the phenomenon of being hunted in the wild, that cold certainty of pursuit, spares no one, regardless of strength or experience. Even the strong, the capable, the ones who seem outwardly invulnerable, can find themselves gripped by an inexplicable fear that defies reason and ends in tragedy. This brings us to the deeply unsettling case of Marcus "Rhino" Riley, a man whose physical prowess was legendary, yet whose final hours became a terrifying, contradictory enigma along the quiet banks of Blackwater Creek. If you knew anything about college football in the early 2000s, you knew the name Marcus Riley. Maybe not nationally famous like the big Division I stars, but a legend in his own sphere. A quarterback built like a linebacker, 6'2", 240 pounds of solid muscle, who led his team to an astonishing 3 national championships. They called him Rhino not just for his size, but for his utterly fearless, almost reckless style of play. While most quarterbacks spent their careers avoiding contact, Rhino seemed to thrive on it. He'd lower his shoulder, plow through defenders, get up grinning after hits that would sideline lesser men. His coaches despaired, but his teammates revered him. He was famous for his toughness, playing through injuries that would have benched anyone else. There was the legendary playoff run his junior year where he played with a broken collarbone, never telling a soul until after they'd hoisted the championship trophy. He was, by all accounts, indestructible. But the blinding lights of college stardom eventually fade. Rhino's transition to professional football was less triumphant. Brief, forgettable stints with a couple of NFL teams, riding the bench, seeing the writing on the wall. He wasn't quite fast enough, maybe his arm wasn't quite strong enough for that elite level. He tried Europe for a season, but that fizzled too. He ended up back in the States, playing for a small-time indoor arena league. The passion still burned, but the roar of the crowd was smaller, the future uncertain. He knew, deep down, his playing days were effectively over. It was a tough adjustment, grappling with the loss of identity, the shift from local hero to just another guy. Around the time he finally hung up his cleats for good, though, something wonderful happened. He met Sarah. An all-state volleyball player herself, she matched his competitive fire and understood the athlete's mindset. They were, friends said, a perfect match. Grounded, athletic, deeply in love. Their wedding in 2010 was telling. The big, tough Rhino, the man who never flinched on the field, stood at the altar shaking, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed with emotion as Sarah walked down the aisle. It felt like a turning point, a conscious step away from the fading glory of football and into a new life, family, stability, a different kind of future. They settled in Redwood County, Michigan, bought a house, had 2 beautiful kids. Marcus landed a solid job in medical sales. By all accounts, he was hitting his stride, finding genuine contentment in his post-football life. He was a devoted husband, a doting father. Grounded. Happy. The Rhino persona was mostly reserved for telling old war stories now. He wasn't a man prone to flights of fancy or sudden panic. Not at all. That's what made the events of Memorial Day weekend, 2013, so utterly baffling and terrifying. Sarah's family had planned their annual 3-day fishing trip along the winding, picturesque Blackwater Creek, a tradition Marcus had eagerly embraced. They rented a rustic cabin near the family's campsite. The weekend was idyllic, sunny days, cool nights, successful fishing, laughter around the campfire. Marcus was particularly proud of his new pontoon boat, a recent purchase symbolizing his settled life, and he'd spent hours puttering along the creek, teaching his kids to fish. On the last evening, Sunday, May 26th, with the weekend drawing to a close, Marcus decided he wanted one more quick solo trip out on his beloved boat. Just 30, maybe 45 minutes, he told Sarah. A last chance to cast a line, enjoy the peace of the river as the sun began to dip below the treeline. He pulled on his fishing waders and jacket, grabbed his favorite rod. Sarah and the kids drove him the short distance to the wooden stairs leading down to the water where his boat was moored. Before heading down, he turned, smiled, told them he'd call from O'Malley's Landing, the next boat ramp downriver, when he needed a ride back. Totally normal. A perfect end to a perfect weekend. 42 minutes later, at precisely 9:27 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. She answered, expecting Marcus's familiar voice telling her he was ready for pickup. Instead, the voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. It was Marcus, yes, but strained, breathless, laced with a terror she had never, ever heard from him before. Sarah. Sarah, listen. They're following me. He gasped. 2 guys, they're in the trees. He was on the pontoon boat, out on the water, he explained frantically, but he could hear them keeping pace with him along the thickly wooded riverbank. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. Stalking him. Sarah, stunned into silence, tried to process the impossible words. Marcus, her Marcus, the Rhino, terrified? Followed? It made no sense. Before she could even form a question, he blurted out something even more bizarre, his voice tight with panic. Gotta beach the boat, Sarah. Gotta take my clothes off. I'll call. The line went dead. Confusion warred with a rising tide of ice-cold fear. Sarah frantically redialed his number again and again. Straight to voicemail. This wasn't Marcus. Fear wasn't in his vocabulary. For him to sound that scared, something was terribly wrong. Her hands shaking, she called 911, her voice trembling as she relayed the fragmented, terrifying call and Marcus's location on Blackwater Creek. Then, she called her family at the nearby campsite. Her brother, Ben, immediately tried calling Marcus's phone. Miraculously, Marcus answered. Marcus. Where are you? What's going on? Ben demanded. Marcus's reply was slurred, disconnected. Ben? Don't know where I am. 2 guys, still following me. Ben pressed him. Are you on the boat? Are you on land? Talk to me, man. But all Marcus said, his voice fading, was, getting pretty rough out here, Ben. Then, silence. The call ended. Ben relayed the equally disturbing conversation to Sarah. It added no clarity, only deepened the dread. What 2 guys? Why take his clothes off? Why did he sound so disoriented? The family made a quick decision, head straight to O'Malley's Landing, the ramp Marcus had said he'd call from. Maybe he'd make his way there. They arrived to find the landing deserted. They yelled his name into the darkening woods, their calls swallowed by the twilight. Nothing. Soon after, a police cruiser pulled up, responding to Sarah's 911 call. The officers took a formal statement from Sarah, her voice breaking as she recounted the terrifying calls. An official missing person report was filed. Marcus Rhino Riley was missing. The police acted quickly. Their first step, contact Marcus's cell phone provider and request an emergency ping to triangulate his location. The technology could provide a rough idea based on which towers his phone was connecting to. The results, when they came back, were utterly baffling. The last 4 locations pinged by his phone within that short window of time were miles apart from each other, 4, 5, even close to 7 miles between points. How could he have covered that much ground, through rugged, densely wooded terrain along the creek, in such a short time? Maybe pure adrenaline, the officers reasoned. Rhino Riley running for his life could potentially cover surprising distances. But the locations themselves presented an even bigger puzzle. Plotted on a map, each ping point was either directly adjacent to a paved road or would have required crossing one to reach the next point. Why? If he was lost and panicked, Why wouldn't he head for the road, flag down a car, seek help? Why keep moving erratically from point to point, effectively staying within the wilderness while repeatedly brushing against the edges of safety? It defied logic. Strange as they were, the pings gave the search teams starting points. Officers were dispatched to each location, while others began systematically searching the riverbanks downstream from where Marcus had launched his boat. Within an hour, they found the pontoon boat. It was nosed onto the muddy bank, a little way downriver, beached awkwardly as if done in a hurry. An oar was missing. Dropped in panic? Used defensively? Taken by whoever he thought was following him? There was no sign of Marcus himself. Searchers meticulously covered the area around the boat, shouting his name. Only the river's murmur answered. Then came another chilling piece of information. A man who owned a cabin nearby contacted the police. He'd been out on his porch earlier that evening, around the time Marcus vanished. He reported hearing screaming. Not just shouting, he insisted, but raw, terrified screaming coming from the direction of the riverbank where the boat was later found. It corroborated the terror in Marcus's voice but offered no clue to his current whereabouts. For the next 48 hours, the search intensified. Hundreds of police and volunteers swept through the woods, focusing on the ping locations and the river corridor. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Dogs were brought in again, but the terrain was difficult. There was no sign of Marcus Riley. Hope dwindled with each passing hour. Then, on the evening of Tuesday, May 28th, almost exactly 2 days after that frantic phone call, a search team made the grim discovery. Marcus's body was located in a patch of dense woods, less than half a mile from a paved road. Significantly, his location was geographically situated between the last known cell phone ping points, suggesting the pings had indeed tracked his final movements. The scene was profoundly unsettling. He was lying completely face down in the dirt and leaves. His right arm was trapped beneath his body, his left arm flung unnaturally over his head, his fingers tightly clenched around a handful of dead grass. There were no obvious signs of violence, no bullet holes, stab wounds, or indications of a struggle. When they carefully turned him over, there was some dried blood around his nose, likely from hitting the ground, but otherwise, no significant external trauma. He appeared fully clothed in his fishing gear, but the lead investigator noted something odd. The fixed strap on his fishing waders was severely twisted, almost impossibly so. It would have been incredibly uncomfortable, something Marcus would have undoubtedly fixed immediately when putting them on unless he had taken them off at some point in a state of extreme distress and put them back on hastily and incorrectly. Or, unless someone else had put them back on him. Adding to the confirmation of his bizarre movements, his cell phone was found undisturbed in his front pocket. The initial autopsy yielded few answers, deepening the mystery. No overt trauma, no clear indication of what killed this incredibly fit former athlete. Toxicology reports later came back clean, no drugs, no disqualifying levels of alcohol. Eventually, the medical examiner reached a conclusion: Marcus Riley had died of positional asphyxia leading to pneumonia, caused by inhaling his own vomit. A finding that pointed not to external violence, but to a body under extreme duress, likely brought on by severe panic, exhaustion, or possibly a seizure. This official cause of death only fueled the conflicting theories attempting to explain the inexplicable. The first, and perhaps most widely considered possibility, centered on Marcus's football past. Years of enduring brutal hits on the field. Could he have been suffering from undiagnosed chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head trauma in athletes? CTE can manifest in paranoia, confusion, erratic behavior. Maybe Marcus experienced a sudden, severe paranoid episode triggered by the isolation of the river. Perhaps a flicker of movement, a shadow, became magnified in his mind into pursuing figures. His history offered a sliver of support. Sarah vaguely recalled a brief, odd incident back in 2011 where Marcus had become convinced someone was following his car, rushing into a relative's house in a state of agitation, though he could never identify who or why. Could the fishing trip have triggered a far more intense, fatal version of this? Did he get lost, panic, imagine the pursuit, run himself into exhaustion, vomit from the exertion or panic, and fatally inhale it? It sounds plausible, until you stack it against the glaring contradictions. If this was purely a paranoid delusion, why the repeated proximity to paved roads without seeking help? Why didn't he flag down a car? His instinct in the 2011 incident was to seek safety with family. Why would his instinct now be to plunge deeper into the woods, away from potential rescue? Why leave the relative safety of his pontoon boat in the first place? And the bizarre, specific details of his phone calls, 2 men following him, the inexplicable urge to take his clothes off, these don't fit neatly into a simple narrative of getting lost and panicked. Then there's the neighbor who reported hearing terrified screams near the boat launch. Was that the sound of a man battling internal demons, or confronting an external threat? If he was being pursued, by whom? And why? Why stalk him along the river? Why let him make frantic phone calls? Why leave no trace of their presence? And why the twisted waiter strap? Why the missing oar? Marcus Rhino Riley, the man who seemed unbreakable, met his end alone in the woods, apparently overcome by sheer terror. Whether that terror stemmed from a damaged brain betraying him or from tangible entities stalking the banks of Blackwater Creek remains hauntingly unclear. His mysterious death left behind a heartbroken wife and children, and a chilling puzzle box of contradictory evidence and unanswered questions. His story stands as a tragic testament to the fact that even the strongest among us can be rendered helpless by fear, whether its source lies within the complexities of the human mind or in the dark, unknown corners of the wilderness itself. The lingering shadows, unanswered questions from the edge of the wild. Marcus Riley, a man defined by strength, met his end in a state of terror that defies understanding. His death, like the ordeal of Clara Vance and the impossible flight of the Miller and Abbott children, adds another layer to the chilling tapestry of encounters in the wild, leaving us to wonder about the true nature of the shadows that sometimes follow us into the deep woods. Whether pursued by demons of the mind born from past trauma, or by tangible, malicious entities stalking the banks of Blackwater Creek, the result was the same. A life extinguished, a family shattered, and a chilling puzzle left behind, riddled with contradictory evidence that offers no easy answers. These 3 stories, though separated by decades in geography, resonate with a terrifying common chord, the profound, soul-shaking experience of being actively hunted in remote wilderness settings. This isn't the disorientation of being lost or the understandable fear of encountering a known predator. This is something else. It's the gut-wrenching certainty of being targeted, of being relentlessly pursued by an entity, or entities, that often remain unseen, their motives utterly alien, their presence signaled only by inexplicable sounds, unnerving sightings, and an overwhelming sense of dread that transcends normal fear. It's the primal fear of becoming prey, amplified by the vast indifference and isolation of the wild. We witnessed Clara Vance's desperate, weeks-long ordeal in the Serpent River National Forest, a testament to survival against unimaginable odds, yet forever marked by the ambiguity of her pursuer and the bizarre, inexplicable discovery of sustenance that perhaps saved her life. We saw the baffling miracle of Leo, Mia, and Finn, found alive against logic on the treacherous slopes of Shadow Mountain, their fragmented childhood fears painting a disturbing picture of pursuit by monstrous figures that defy easy categorization. And we confronted the tragic mystery of Marcus Riley, the seemingly invincible former athlete whose final, panicked hours along Blackwater Creek left a trail of contradictory clues, frantic phone calls, impossible movements, and an end suggestive of extreme terror, yet lacking definitive proof of an external assailant. Each narrative echoes the same chilling theme: inexplicable pursuit, profound fear, and lingering questions. Despite official investigations often concluding with plausible, if sometimes unsatisfying, explanations, exposure, disorientation, misidentification, perhaps even mental breaks, a profound sense of ambiguity clings stubbornly to these wilderness encounters, and countless others filed away under labels like the Wilderness Echo or Unseen Tracks. Definitive answers remain stubbornly elusive. The evidence, when examined closely, often refuses to fit neatly into the boxes of conventional understanding. Eyewitness accounts clash with physical possibilities. Strange artifacts appear where they shouldn't. The sheer intensity and specific nature of the fear reported by victims often feels disproportionate to standard explanations. These aren't simply unsolved mysteries waiting for a final clue, they feel like glimpses across a threshold, momentary exposures to unexplained phenomena operating outside our known reality. The ambiguity itself becomes a source of unease. And this lack of resolution carries a heavy weight. For survivors, the psychological scars can last a lifetime, a persistent fear, a fractured sense of reality, the burden of carrying a story few can truly comprehend or believe. For the families left behind, the unresolved grief is compounded by the gnawing why and what if, a perpetual lack of closure that prevents healing. And for those of us who hear these stories, they tap into a deep-seated anxiety, a collective fear of the unknown that stirs beneath the surface of our well-ordered lives. They remind us that vast swathes of our planet remain untamed, potentially harboring secrets and entities beyond our current understanding. They force us to confront the unsettling possibility that we aren't always at the top of the food chain, that human vulnerability is starkly revealed when the thin veneer of civilization is stripped away. These chilling narratives ultimately serve as powerful, if terrifying, reminders of the vastness of the unknown that surrounds us. They highlight the limits of our perception and the potential for nature to hold secrets far stranger and more complex than we might imagine. While we seek patterns, logic, and concrete explanations, some wilderness encounters stubbornly resist categorization, leaving only lingering questions and a profound sense of mystery. We are left to contemplate the thin, permeable veil between the world we know and the deep, quiet wildness that exists just beyond the reach of our streetlights and cell signals. And perhaps, most unsettlingly, we are left with the chilling thought that sometimes, when you stare too long into the wilderness, something might just stare back.